Welcome back, folks. In this video, I'm going to try to extend a little further the arguments that you were just looking at by Kant and the arguments that you're about to look at by Christine Korsgaard about the nature of Kant's moral theory, and in particular, his development of a theory of right and wrong that isn't linked to good and bad consequences. So let's start thinking of some situations where the moral value of an act might be disconnected from the consequences that are created. So imagine that a person comes to you with a button. And if you press this button, the person assures you that two things will happen. One, that you will receive $1 million in cash, and two, that someone, somewhere, will die. The simple question offered by this thought experiment is this: is it wrong to press the button? There's one or more fictionalized versions of this dilemma, and almost always we're supposed to think that it's really wrong to press the button, even though characters are tempted to do it. And the characters in these situations are all the time thinking of the kinds of things that would be good reasons to press the button, although to the viewer they almost seem like excuses or rationalizations or something like that. And so what the dilemma is supposed to get us to do is to ask, could there be a good reason to press the button? Now, imagine that the character makes the bad call here and presses the button, but somehow the button malfunctions, or maybe the man who had the button was a liar or something like that, and no one dies. That is to say, no bad comes of pressing the button. So, if that's the case, is it still wrong to press the button? Or rather, was it still wrong to press the button? Probably you want to say that the fact that the button broke can't factor into good or bad reasons to press the button. Definitely the person pressing the button can't even be aware of them, much less in control of them. So probably you want to say that whatever moral value, whether it's rightness or wrongness or neither, consists in pressing the button breaking definitely can't have anything to do with it. So imagine that a similar person brings you a button that looks much the same, but actually does something very different, which is that if you press this button, two things happen. The first thing is still the same thing. That is, you get $1 million, but also a very, very needy person, a person who really deserves $1 million, gets $1 million. So how about this button? Let's not even ask if it's wrong to press this button. It's very hard to say that it would be wrong to press this button. But the better question is there a good reason to press the button? Or can there be a good reason to press the button? Are all reasons to press the button equally good? And by that I mean morally good, morally valuable. Consider the first sort of obvious one. I press the button because I want $1 million. Or reason two, I press the button because people who need help should get help. Both of these are reasons to press the button which might occur to someone, and maybe a person who presses the button might have both reasons, but really what we might want to ask ourselves is, which is the reason primarily that the person uses when pressing the button? Now, imagine that this button malfunctions and someone dies. Something really, really bad happened after you pressed the button. Was it wrong to press the button? Again, given how the person pressing this button is utterly disconnected both from the knowledge that this could happen or the possibility that this could happen, it's a little bit challenging to think that the agent has done something wrong that they were both utterly unaware of and was totally out of their control. Whatever moral valence that the act held when the button was pressed, it seems plausible to say that this particular outcome is not connected to the moral valence of the act. Certainly, there are cases where a person ought to have known better or something like this, but in a situation with a button of this sort, it's hard to see how the agent was supposed to know that this was going to happen. So given how we usually think about what is good for us, that is, the kinds of benefits that we aim at in order to build our lives the way they want them to, it's not a big surprise that in these stories about buttons like this and other kinds of strange deals with men in suits, that somebody is going to act in a way that is motivated by self-interest. It would be really, really, really weird if it was wrong to act out of self interest, given that really simple things like eating lunch are very clearly motivated almost entirely by self interest. And more importantly, there are lots of cases where you find people who neglect themselves, and you think that no, this person needs to take care of themselves. It's wrong to not take care of yourself. So it's definitely got to be sometimes right and very frequently good to act in your own self interest. But when we say that, really what we're saying is that it's not wrong necessarily to act self interestedly. But that's not the same thing as saying that acting self interestedly is a morally right or a morally valuable thing to do. The person who presses the button that gives money to a needy person by coincidence, they're definitely doing something that produces good. But I would be really surprised if you were to defend the idea that they were doing something morally right. Definitely not anything wrong, but morally right? What's moral about this action? It seems totally self interested, which is perfectly understandable. But it seems like a hard sell to think that there's something morally valuable going on. So, what this might suggest then is that there are some acts which do good, but are not the result of a person wanting to have done some particular good or even something that you would recognize as being morally valuable. So, what that would mean, and this is Kant's main argument, is that a person can do something good without having willed anything good. If by what we mean here is that a person can cause good things to happen in the world without really having meant to. So, what Kant wants to argue is that when we see somebody help someone else because they wanted to help themselves, it makes sense to say that the act wasn't wrong, but also that it has no moral value to it at all. I meet a lot of people who are skeptical about what's sometimes called conspicuous acts of charity. That is, like a person who talks a lot about how they donate money, or a person who talks all the time about how they volunteer at the soup kitchen. At some point, you start to get suspicious that they're just doing it so that they could tell you about it. Maybe you want to say that they have some sort of flaw of character, but the volunteering at the soup kitchen is definitely not the wrong thing to do. But you don't want to accord any moral value to it. Maybe what you think is that the person who's really doing something morally valuable is the one who's not bragging about it or something like that. One of the basic claims that Kant wants to make in his theory is that what matters about moral action is, in particular, acts and the attentions that go along with them. And when Kant talks about an act, all of those things are bundled together. An act is a thing that's done for a particular set of reasons. You can accidentally do good and you can accidentally do bad because guess what? You're not in control of the consequences of your action. But, Kant says, you can't accidentally do right. That's just not possible. If you do something right, you do it on purpose. And really, for Kant, what that means is that when you do something right, it can only have happened when you did it because it was right. And this wanting to do what's right is the thing that Kant identifies in your prior reading as the goodwill. And the goodwill is the only path to right action, at least according to Kant. So let's go back to this first button and focus our attention on another point that Kant wants to make here. So imagine we again have this button where one person gets $1,000,000 and then someone will die. Now, maybe this hasn't occurred to you until now, but the way at least that I've stipulated this here is that one of the people who could die here is you. So if your main reason for pressing the button is that you want to have $1,000,000 and presumably you want to have the dollars so that you can spend the dollars, but pressing the button might kill you, is it possible for you to have a good reason to press this button, given what it might do? So this is a little bit complicated, at least if we try to think about it very quickly. But let's slow down here and think through the logic that's going on, the means ends reasoning that's happening here. If the main reason that you're going to press the button is that you want $1 million and pressing the button might kill you, then there's a possibility that pressing the button is self defeating, right? Which is that pressing the button might actually get you the very opposite of what you want. It might put you in a situation in which $1 million could do you no good at all. What you're doing just definitely doesn't make any sense. And if you broaden the scope of this question so that it includes more than just you, right? If we think that everyone in the world has access to a button like this and is presented with this situation and thinks about the button in the same way that we do, the problem gets even worse. If any person in the world would feel justified in pressing the button, the last thing that anyone is going to be able to do is walk around safely with $1 million in cash, because at any moment they might drop down dead on the ground. Uh, this reason that we want to use to press the button, this reason that we wish to have $1 million, in a world where people really think that you can press a button in order to get $1 million at the risk of killing someone, the thing that we want to do is not really doable, at least not in a very secure way. So there are a lot of acts like this where we consider the thing that we're aiming at, we consider the end. If we look carefully at the means, that means, if used by everyone to secure that particular end, would destroy it for everyone. We just can't have our cake and eat it too. Maybe the best and simplest example that Kant gave in the reading that you looked at last time was the simple problem of theft. If you think about what a thief wants two things which are utterly contradictory. A thief wants it to be the case that people have property, and also the thief wants to have that property. So the thief wants there to be a system of property, but really the thief wants it so that they can exploit it. They want to be able to have property at the end of the theft. Because if there were really no such thing as secured property, stealing stuff is for sure the last thing that you could do, because it would never be possible for you to actually have anything. You could hold on to it for a second. But if any person were always justified in taking stuff from someone else, well, that's a world in which there just isn't any sensible notion of property at all. The thief, just like our button presser here, wants to have their cake and eat it too. And that just doesn't make any sense. It's illogical, it's self contradictory. And this is really the way that Kant, and as we'll see next, Korsgaard, think about the nature of moral action. So, as you take a look at the reading that's offered by Korsgaard next, she's going to argue in a couple of different ways that one of the main points that Kant wants to make about moral action, and in particular morally wrong action, is that morally wrong action happens when a person tries to use a reason for acting that isn't shareable among other persons. They want themselves to be like a special exception to moral rules, or they want to have some kind of a system in the world that protects something, but really they want that to exist so that they can exploit it, like the thief. So as you take a look at Korsgaard's two different explanations of Kant's theory of the universal law and also Kant's theory of the end in itself, think a little bit about this basic idea that Kant and Korsgaard want to pursue, that morally wrong action is, at the end, something nonsensical. It's wanting to have a reason that you definitely can't have. Take care.